Get started here in a couple minutes, guys. Give it a little bit longer. Bring this thing over. Really? All right. All right, guys, we will get the show on the road. If you don't mind, we ask, what's today's date? The 7th? Is it the 7th? If you don't mind, if we can get your name, phone number, email, that kind of stuff. It's just, we like to keep people informed, keep people in the loop, so pass that around if you will. Bunch of seats up here. Nobody wants to sit in the front row. I don't know what's up with that. What's that? Yeah, these aren't the best chairs up here either, so I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to take it personally. I'm gonna basically say that it's because they aren't the best chairs. I'll tell myself that anyway. That's all right. You're good. You're good. So this is Family Recovery, just so you make sure you're in the right building and at the right meeting. My name is Rich Jones. I'm the CEO here at Favor Greenville. And I'm a person in long-term recovery myself. I've been in recovery for 17 years. I took a drink for the first time. The first substance I ever used was alcohol, and I was 14 years old. And what I didn't know at the time, but what we know now is that the number one indicator of whether or not a person will develop a problem is age of first use. Even a stronger indicator than family kind of hereditary issues. There are hereditary connections. There are genetic vulnerabilities that you're born with. But the biggest indicator is how old are you when you start messing around with this stuff. And what I mean by that is more regularly using it. And so I kind of moved through that, did all right for a while, was pretty successful in high school, had a football scholarship, all that kind of good stuff. But in 1998, I was in a car accident, and I was prescribed opioid-based painkillers. It was, at that time, it was stuff like Percocet, Vicodin, Dilaudid. Oxycontin was sort of just coming into the picture and stuff like that, but it was at the beginning of don't let people feel pain. So I got these things hand over fist, and they took me out, and they took me out really, really quickly. And they took me to like a very desperate state of mind, and I behaved in ways that was not consistent with who I was. You guys get that? I think one of the things about addiction, it's very misunderstood, and the stigma around addiction is alive and well, mainly because we paint these pictures, or society paints these pictures of the person who's addicted as, I was a liar, cheater, and a thief, and I was a scumbag, and I was, sleeping outside, and I was eating out of a dumpster, and I was going to jail every other week, and I was holding up the convenience store to support my habit. And don't get me wrong, sometimes it gets to that level. But that's problematic, guys, because that's not how it looks for everybody. That's not how it looked for me. That's not how it looks for a lot of people I know. It doesn't go down like that. And the other thing, this overemphasis on the overdose epidemic and the opioid epidemic, it also gets us to take our eye off another ball, like alcohol, right? Alcohol kills more people than anything. I don't know if you guys know that or not, but 88,000 people a year die as a direct result of alcohol. 65,000 die of overdose. So 160,000 people a year die of preventable death. But what we do is we get overly focused on this stereotypical kind of caricature of who a person is with substance use disorder. And I'm telling you that I always like to joke, and say we walk among you. You don't even know we're there. You're not noticing us. We're your lawyers. We're your doctors. We are flying your airplanes. That should make you feel comfortable, right? And so that's an important thing for families to understand, because as you kind of go through this process, the embarrassment and the shame and the stigma, it'll keep you from seeking help. It'll keep you from seeking information. It'll also keep your loved one from seeking information. I can tell you that was the case with me. You weren't going to get me to go anywhere and kind of like talk openly about this stuff because I was embarrassed. I was overwhelmingly embarrassed. But let's get real clear that this is a healthcare issue. This is a healthcare issue, and it's treatable, and that's what you guys are here to learn about tonight. We're going to talk about what that is, and we're going to talk about some ways that you can kind of cope with this as you go through it. I'm also a therapist. Don't hold that against me. That was a joke. That was a joke. And I'm a licensed clinical addiction specialist and an interventionist. I have an MBA with a concentration in healthcare management, a master's degree in social psychology, and I've worked in a lot of different clinical settings as well, a lot of different programs. So tonight is not meant to be a therapy group. It's meant more to be an educational group, an information sharing group. And I'm not going to tell you what to do with your situations. I don't think that's fair. I don't know anybody well enough at an individual level to look at you and say, you should do this or you shouldn't do that. But what I do hope to do is give you enough information that you can start to make informed decisions on what you want to do with whatever circumstance you're dealing with. So I also want you guys to ask questions. I have an agenda on what I was going to talk about tonight, but I pulled this whiteboard over because we can write down other things and we can get into other things along the way. I'm going to go over what I want to go over, but if you got specific questions. So one of the things I'll tell you is a lot of times people will want my opinion on something, or they'll want to meet with me to kind of get information. That's nearly impossible, guys. It's almost impossible at the juncture where this organization is now in terms of my time and where I'm at. But I will answer your questions here tonight, and I will do the best I can. So if you got something going on, bring it up tonight. All right? Let's talk real quick. This is a very, very cool picture. Look at this picture. Okay? So I'm about to go off on my social media Facebook rant. And the grand irony is that I'm live on social media right now. Okay? So if you look at this, and the reason I'm putting this up here, it's not just about social media, it's about this idea. When you're dealing with addiction in your family, one of the things that happens is this embarrassment and this shame kind of like creeps in. And you start to compare yourself to other people. And you start to ask questions like, what did we do wrong? What could we have done different? Oh, it doesn't look like they're going through anything. And I put this picture up because this is the stereotypical kind of thing that's going on social media, right? Everything looks great. Look at the picture she took. It's her and her beautiful little baby, and she's got her act together. And now some poor mom's looking at that picture saying, this isn't what my house looks like. Well, here's what I'm telling you. If you're looking at any situation, friends, neighbors, people you go to church with, and you're saying, well, our house doesn't look like theirs, be careful what you wish for. You might not want your house to look like theirs. Everybody's going through something. One of the great perks, one of the secondary benefits of being a therapist is you really get to see that everybody's going through something. There's nobody out there that doesn't have a skeleton in the closet. I firmly believe that. And if they tell me that they don't, then that's even more frightening. Because now you're talking about American Psycho type stuff going on right there. So, and why is this important when you're dealing with substance use disorder? My theory goes like this. You have enough on your plate in terms of real life worries and anxieties and real life stresses to worry about that this stuff is going to be overwhelming, and it's going to overflow your stress bucket. It's going to overflow your anxiety bucket, and you just don't need this type of stuff in your life when you're going through these issues. There was a study that came out about Facebook and social media, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about this because two studies that came out. One was by the story was in NPR. I think the survey was done by Gallup, but basically 56% of Americans report that they're lonely, that they're chronically lonely. And the reason is disconnection, chronic disconnection. We can be with each other and not be with each other at the same time. We can have 5,000 friends on social media, and we can have no friends in real life. That kind of thing. And what that leads to is it leads to a void that I believe is being filled right now with substances. That's why one of the reasons why I think you see these climbing rates of abuse. And then, of course, we have to deal with it ourselves. The second study said there's a direct connection between screen time and suicidal thinking, believe it or not, especially among middle schoolers and high schoolers. Essentially, it's like they're always in school. Now, I don't know what school was like for y'all, but school could be good on any given day, but also on any other given day, there are a bunch of cliques. There are a bunch of like, who's the most popular kid in school? What if that was in your face 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? At least back in the day, when I left and went home, and I didn't have to deal with it again until the next day. So all these things are kind of like adding up to create this environment where I think we have to check ourselves, and we really are going to have to start making some changes. So this week I went on vacation and I detoxed my kids from screens. And when I say I detoxed them. Actually, I didn't do anything. I just stood back and watched my wife do it. Okay? Like seriously, like my job was literally, my instructions were do not interfere with this process. And I'm telling you, as true as I'm standing here, I feel like they went through some kind of like 1 or 2 day withdrawal period from being on, in their case, it would be more like video games and stuff like that, not so much social media. So, and I wrote a post, and I'm going to do a blog post on this, on some of the things that the founders of Facebook, Sean Parker, who was the first president of Facebook, is saying. The truth is, we really don't know what it's doing to people's minds. It hasn't been studied yet. Just like back in the day, I don't know if anybody here remembers this. Do you know back in the day, cigarettes were thought to be safe? You could smoke cigarettes on airplanes. You could smoke cigarettes in your doctor's office. The dangers weren't known. Imagine that. Imagine that. The dangers weren't known of cigarettes, and now what? Everybody knows the dangers. The theory is there's probably similar things going on with social media. How does that apply to what you guys are dealing with? It's not. I'm not saying people in here are on social media or anything like that, but the idea of getting caught up in comparisons with other people, or the idea of getting caught up whenever you're suffering through a lot of this stuff, the idea of getting caught up in what's going on with other families is dangerous. That's my point with this. To try to stay focused on what you have in front of you, to stay focused on the next step and what you have to deal with, and not get caught up with all the other things that are going on. Because right now, you just don't have the time or energy to really put up with this. This is the time to find positive people to be around. Try to, the best of your ability, minimize or manage negative and toxic people. The people who are going to give you unsolicited advice. There are people that are going to tell you, if that was my kid, this is what I would do. I've said this before. Here's a couple facts. No, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't. That's what they would. That's what they're able to say when they're looking at your situation. But if it was their kid, there'd be a reason not to do that. Yes, ma'am.
I've heard that one man responded saying, "If it was your kid, I'd do that too."
If it was your kid, I'd do that too. Yeah, that's right. That's a great response. If that was my kid, I'd kick him out. If that was your kid, I'd do that too. That is outstanding. Everybody take note of that. I want everybody to make that statement whenever that comes up. If that was my kid, he'd be out in the street. If that was your kid, he'd be out in the street too. I mean, but it is really easy for people to armchair this stuff. It's very easy for people to armchair this stuff. Sometimes it's even very easy for like professionals to armchair this stuff. I'm going to stand up here and tell you, flat out, 100% transparent. I don't know exactly how I would handle it if it was my kid. There would be a textbook answer, but there's no way in the world that I can stand up here and tell you that I would follow that textbook answer. Actually, there probably isn't any textbook answer. There really isn't, guys. It's individualized to each and everybody's personal situation. Do you guys get that? I'm going to talk about general principles tonight and give you information, but you have to filter it through what you got going on. You have to filter it through things like, how long have you been dealing with this issue? You got to filter it through, how severe is the situation? You got to filter it through, has the person been physically aggressive towards you? Has the person been stealing your stuff? They're very, very different manifestations of this issue. It's not this one blanket statement where anybody should ever stand up in front of you and say, practice tough love and kick that guy out and don't let him come back until he does rehab and don't let him come back until he's really ready to do recovery. That may be the case. It may be. But I'm here to tell you, it also may not be the case. You're going to have to figure that out as you go. Now, we believe groups like this can help you with that. And we believe also talking to people individually can help you with that, because you're going to need to get some information and some advice along the way. So we talked about the fact that this is an educational group. It's not meant to be therapy. What you're going to hear tonight is, my professional opinion on this stuff. It's my take. You may talk to, I say it all the time, 10 other people may tell you something different. They would be wrong, but but that's okay. That's their take. If you're seeing a therapist or you're going to groups or you're doing something else, we would encourage you to keep doing that. This isn't meant to take the place of anything. It's kind of meant to give you some supplemental information. So real quick, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Unless you have questions, stop me and let's go through and let's talk about what the group needs to hear about. But we've talked about this before. Addiction is not a matter of choice. This is not a matter of choice. And we can't overemphasize this issue, because half of Americans, 50% of Americans believe that addiction is a moral issue, that it's a choice. Okay? Now, I don't know that any Americans think diabetes type 2 is a moral issue. I think you'd have to look really long and hard to find somebody who would tell you that diabetes is a choice. You made the choice to eat that way. You did it to yourself. You made the choice to not exercise. You did it to yourself. You knew the hereditary factors. You did it to yourself. But 50%, literally half of Americans, believe that addiction is a moral issue and it's a choice. And so what you need to do while you're sitting out here, guys, is you need to kind of assess this and see where you're at with this and what you think about it, because this is going to influence how you handle it, right? I mean, this is very much going to influence how you respond to your loved one. If you think it's a choice, then, what are you more apt to do? You're more apt to argue with them, debate them, cajole, threaten. You'll try all these techniques to try to get them to change, because you actually believe they're making a choice and that they can consciously change. They can just decide to change today. And I'm not trying to remove responsibility from them. That's not my point with this. But what I am trying to tell you is that there's something else going on, and I'll show you a couple pictures of the brain. There's something else going on other than whatever you want to call it, a disorder, a disease, or whatever the heck you want to call it. There's something other than Rich just decided to wake up today and go get high and ruin everybody's day. It's something other than that. Yes, Carol?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I have a 17-year-old granddaughter that about 3 weeks ago, her dad caught her smoking pot and drinking with friends at somebody's house.
Yep.
So he laid the hammer down.
Okay.
So I called her a few days later and said, honey, you have a choice right now to use or not.
Yeah.
But if you keep doing this, you may not have a choice. Is that okay?
That was good. I don't know if you could hear what Carol said. Let me repeat the question. The question was, 17-year-old, smoking a little bit of the hippie lettuce, smoking a little bit of the devil's cabbage, okay, and got caught.
Yeah.
And so throw the hammer down, consequences, stuff like that, but then have a conversation and explain that you have a choice in this right now, but if you're not careful, that choice will go away. I'll tell you the conversation I had with my daughter whenever we were in Pittsburgh for this vacation. It had to do with underage drinking. And this is what I said to her. And I actually thought it was semi-brilliant. Okay? She is 19, about to be 20. And she had gone out, she was drinking, that kind of thing. She wasn't hammered, but she had a couple drinks. It was obvious. And we were just talking about it. And I said, listen, I want to explain to you something, okay? I said, you got to understand that this is all about how old you are when you start using this stuff. Like the longer you wait and the longer you can stay away from regular use, the more likely you are to never develop a problem. Like, and you could go your whole life and never have this problem if you can just slow it down and wait. Or you're going to be me. And you understand, I'm 50 years old. You know, I can't even have a drink to unwind. I can't. I've lost that ability, and I've lost that. You see what I was doing there? I was trying to get her in touch with this reality, right? That, you know, you like taking the edge off. You like being able to have a good time every once in a while. I would like to be able to have a good time every once in a while as well, but nobody told me that I needed to wait in order to get there. And guys, I want to say it one more time. You cannot emphasize how important age of first use is. And if your loved one has messed around with something, that's okay too, because it's really about regular use, guys. It's really about regular use. I can count on one hand, and I've counseled thousands and thousands of people with this issue, literally thousands of people, and I can count on one hand the number of people who waited till they were 21. It's all about your brain growing. That's what your granddaughter needs to understand. That this is all about your brain growing and developing, and it doesn't really stop until you're 24. In America, we have laws that are what? You know, you need to be 21. It used to be 18. I'll tell you the truth. I almost feel like if you can get somebody to 18 or 19 in today's culture, you're probably moving it along really in the right direction, that kind of thing. But I think you got to have a conversation like that. But you got to come in from the side angle. You got to kind of come out. Do you guys understand that when you're talking to people about this issue, if you hit people head on, especially young people have an uncanny ability to sit and kind of like nod their head and not listen to anything that you're saying, right? You know they're not. Like, yeah, okay. They're like in their mind, it's like that Charlie Brown teacher's voice. You know, you're like, hey, you better not do that again. If you do that again, you're going to go to rehab and you're going to go to... nah. How do you talk to people in a way that they're actually going to hear it? You know, you try to meet them and you try to motivate them in a different manner. So what I was trying to do was literally say, it's not about not drinking. It's not about the fact that you're never going to do this. It's not about being a teetotaler. It's about wait as long as you can, push this off as long as you can, because what you're going to do is you're going to avoid all these problems down the road. That's kind of like what the conversation was. All right, I'm not going to go through all this criteria. That's the criteria. That's technically how we know whether or not somebody meets substance use disorder. It's not even called addiction. From a diagnostic standpoint, it's called substance use disorder severe. It used to be called chemical dependency. Do you remember? Anybody remember the term chemical dependency? And you also heard the term abuse, alcohol abuse. Alcohol abuse is when you don't finish your drink. That is hilarious. Right? Yeah. So this is what it used to be called. What does this mean? This isn't necessarily going to resonate with the person when they're going through this. You know, I remember getting evaluated and stuff like that. I don't know that somebody would have told me, you meet this criteria, you have this. This is really just the only framework we have for understanding this in any kind of way. If over a 12-month period you meet 6 or more of these criteria in any type of pattern, you technically meet the criteria for substance use disorder severe. And it's not hard to get there, guys. Those are very, very common. First of all, the first 2 are going to happen to you no matter who you are because they're physiological in nature, right? This will happen to you even if you're taking medication the way you're supposed to. Do you guys understand that? Like, if you're taking pain medication the way that you're supposed to, you're still going to develop a tolerance and you're still going to go through withdrawal when you come off. So this just is what it is. This criteria has been developed. What happens is dopamine floods the brain. As dopamine floods the brain self-corrects, shuts off the production of dopamine. Without the production of dopamine, you're left with this feeling of discontentment. You never feel normal. You never feel okay. So you go from using the substance for the fun of it to using the substance for survival. And that's what has become known as addiction. That's all the crazy stuff that goes along with it. Using despite clear consequences. Using despite the fact that you're going to go to jail. Using despite the fact that you're going to get fired. Using despite the fact that your wife's going to kick you out. Whatever it is, it's because your brain has moved. And this is normal functioning, whereas that on the left is the depletion of dopamine. And so this is why when I say you might be trying to talk to somebody who just can't rationally hear you, or it's like you're speaking French and they're speaking English. This is why they're still in a compromised state of mind. And this depends on who the person is, and it varies from time to time. And the good news is you get better. We've talked about that before. But what questions before I move on from what addiction is? Yes, Cynthia.
Well, if somebody's been in recovery after a relapse.
Yeah.
Been in recovery 12 weeks, and they're still having problems with that reasoning perspective.
Yeah, it can take a little bit of time. Cynthia's question was, can you be in recovery? Can you be in recovery 12 weeks? Can you be in recovery 6 weeks? You could be in recovery for a long time and still have some of that going on. There's a term for that. They call it post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And it basically can linger, and it gets better and better as each day goes by, but you're never fully kind of back to where you need to be. That's why we encourage like a certain type of lifestyle to help a person with that. So things like exercising, things like trying to talk to somebody, getting to some meetings is going to help with that. Prayer and meditation is going to help. A lot of these things that you guys hear in terms of recovery programs, you may have heard this. If your loved one was ever in rehab, you probably heard some of this stuff about working recovery programs. That's what that's all about. It's about trying to get yourself back on board sooner than later.
Well, I got another question. If that person goes and gets a beer to try to offset that,
Yeah, it's a great question.
Good.
No, it's a great question. I don't know if you guys could hear it, but the question is, let's just say for sake of argument, you're addicted. I'm addicted to opiates, okay? And I'm in early recovery, because this was my story. I'm in early recovery, and I don't want to use opiates anymore because I clearly understand that they're destructive. But I'm going to go drink a beer, or I'm going to go smoke some marijuana or something like that. That's incredibly common, okay? I got to tell you, like, that's a very, very common. The danger with that is once you start flooding your brain again, you're setting yourself back up for that cycle. You're setting yourself back up for that cycle. And the cycle could play itself out in a multitude of ways. The most dangerous would be you would go back to your original substance, but also what you'll see is it'll just play itself out with the abuse of other substances. Because frequently people will identify a substance that they want to stop. I mean, you'll see this quite a bit. I'm done with X, but I'm still going to do Y. Now, what we believe is that the person should still be coming to recovery meetings, should still be coming to Favor, should still be talking to somebody about that while they're figuring that out. Because what we want to do is we want to keep their head in the game so that they can have a real honest assessment with how life is going while they're doing this. I got to tell you, though, that's not an uncommon phenomenon, and how you want to handle that as a family, again, that's going to vary from situation to situation. So in my particular situation, I had gone through so many manifestations of I'm only going to do X. Do you guys follow me? Like I had so many different times where I was only going to do that. By the time I got to what I would consider my permanent recovery, I didn't have any more get out of jail free cards. My wife was done because I had like 6 or 7 times before where I did. Does that make sense? So by the time I got there, it was like, no, dude, if you go out and drink one beer because you think you can drink one beer, that's your business, but I'm not going to deal with that. Based on her experience with me for the previous 5 or 6 years. Very important. She didn't say that the first time this went down. Do you guys get this? Mm-hmm. This took her, and some people would say, and she might say, it took her too long to realize this. But it definitely took her a period of time to realize that, like, that's not going to work. Because what I did was I convinced her that it would work. I never went back to her and said, hey, I'm going to go get a 6-pack this weekend so I can be snorting oxys off the back of the toilet in 2 weeks. Like, that's never how I approached that potentiality. You know what I mean? Hey, what do you think, Melissa? I was wondering here for a minute, man. Things been going pretty good. Super Bowl's on. What I was wondering was, could I get a 6-pack tonight, and then like in 2 weeks, I'm gonna eat 20 Percocet. You down with that? That's not how the conversation went down. It went down as what? Hey, listen, I'm just gonna grab a 6-pack. I'm gonna drink a couple beers, and when I said it, I was 100% genuine. Real important. Really, really important to understand. That's okay. You get away with whatever you want tonight after what you came up with. It wasn't like you could have hooked a polygraph up to me. You could have hooked a polygraph up to me and said, "Do you really mean that, Rich? Are you really only going to drink a 6-pack?" Absolutely, I'm only going to drink a 6. What are you talking about? I never want to go back to that. I wouldn't even been able to recognize it in myself. Because at the time, I actually thought that that's how it would go down. Then what happens is you light that up again. So now you light that up again, and for some of us, and again, the term is addiction. For some of us who've kind of crossed that line into addiction, whenever you light it up, it's game on. It's game on, and now here I go. And I can tell you, I can look back on my life, and I know for sure that that's me. Now, a lot of people struggle with that part of the decision-making process. A lot of people struggle with it. They don't recognize it in themselves. Or there's this part of them that doesn't quite want to recognize it. Because if you recognize it, that comes with some heavy-duty decision-making, right? If you recognize this, the second part of that is and therefore I'm not going to use any substances. I'm not going to drink. Even though pills took me down, I'm not going to drink. Which is hard. That's a hard thing to say. That's a very difficult thing to say. I mean, let's get real. Alcohol is ingrained in American culture. Find something to do that doesn't involve alcohol. Just go find something to do that doesn't involve alcohol. Find 10 things to do, bring them back by next week. You probably won't have it done. And I'm not talking about manufactured things that you guys, I'm not talking about playing backgammon. I mean like stuff out in the world. Any networking event involves alcohol. Have you gone to a sporting event that didn't involve alcohol? When was the last time you went to a tailgate that didn't involve alcohol? How about a wedding? All the joyous occasions involve alcohol. All the sad occasions involve alcohol. So you understand that part of the equation, guys. Do you see why people would say, I'm not going to do heroin anymore. I'm not going to do cocaine anymore. You don't go out to happy hour for heroin. I've never had that happen in my life. Hey, what are you doing after work? Going out to happy hour with heroin. It's a weird thing to say. So how as family members, how do you want to approach that is a question you want to be asking yourself. If your loved one's in rehab, for example, maybe off getting help, that kind of deal. When they come back, these are all the things that are going to be in your face. How do you want to handle this and how do you want to approach it? Is it like something that you're going to give them a chance to figure out, or are you like, no, I'm done. I know what's going to happen if they do this. I know what's going to happen. What happened for me is I had my own personal experience with that. Probably one of the most valuable things that went on for me was, I had 3 or 4 concerted efforts at quote-unquote recovery, kind of doing it without the total abstinence thing. Like, in other words, where I was really honestly saying, I can't do this anymore. I'm only going to drink a little bit, that kind of stuff. And I just totally 100% screwed it up every single time. So the jury was in for me. Like, the evidence came back. When I came in and I finally got recovery, nobody really talked me into anything. I remember still thinking I was going to drink. I remember that. Like, I remember thinking I'm going to just quit doing pills, but I'm still going to drink. But then I remember kind of like, it's weird, man, just coming to the conclusion of like, no, dude, you've done that 6 other times, and look what's happened. And then again, my wife also came to that conclusion. I don't know exactly. Again, I think it was because we had both been through it. And also, we both got education, guys. I got my education through my own recovery program, people I was around, and she got education. In her case, it was through Al-Anon. So as we both got new information, we made new decisions. What other questions about this? What other questions about this part of the process? Yes, ma'am.
If a person is so-called in remission or very drugs at all.
Yeah.
Okay, but you find out they're still smoking marijuana.
Yeah.
Okay, then they have a relapse, a complete relapse. And now, after the relapse, now it's the alcohol and the weed.
Yeah.
So what do you do in that case?
So it's very similar to the question that Cynthia had about how do you handle alcohol if a person goes out. So the problem here is this person is literally in the process of, it's kind of what I was going through. They're writing their own script. They're over and over again, they're demonstrating that they're substituting one substance for another, and it's leading to disaster. So the question becomes, how do you get this person to realize this? And so what we would suggest are strategies like, so you can always do an intervention. You can always talk about doing an intervention. An intervention usually a lot of times results in a person going to rehab. So that's always something to consider. If that's not where you're at, and that's not where you can go, you can try to get the person involved. If they can get involved in any type of group or any type of coaching or counseling, it's going to help them figure that out. What has to happen is that person has to actually get around somebody, get around a professional who's going to help them talk out loud about that, because they need to come to this conclusion themselves. And it's going to be hard for family members to get them to come to that conclusion, because they're going to argue with you. They're going to tell you how you're crazy. They're going to tell you how it's not what you... But if they came and talked to somebody at Favor Greenville, even if they went to a therapist, what would happen? And you guys may have experienced this in your own lives. As you start to talk about an issue out loud to another human being, you actually start to hear yourself talk about it, and sometimes you start to come to different conclusions about it. You sort of like talk yourself through it, right? But if you're not doing that, in your own mind, you can justify it. You guys get that? It's basic psychology. You talk out loud, you literally hear your own voice, and that is just one of the stupidest things I ever thought. I really think that I can smoke weed and drink, even though the last 7 times I've done it, it's led to a disaster. But the question is how do you get him to talk to somebody? How do you get that person in front of the right group? We suggest getting people to come to our noon meeting, and the reason we suggest getting people to come to our noon meeting is we're very intentional in the way we talk about these things, where we make sure that we don't blow a person like that out of the water. So when they come in, and we've been criticized by that because people don't understand what we're doing at all. They don't understand the method to the madness. They think we're okaying substance use. We're not okaying anything. We're just not preaching to people. We're not trying to slam you over the head. And because we want you to hear us. And we think that if you hear us, you actually may come to your own conclusion about this. Does anybody have any advice or any suggestions for that situation, if they've gone through it themselves?
We went through that. My son would relapse he'd be doing perfect, and he'd relapse after about 6 months. We're like, what is this? And we always knew, when he'd start not coming home at night or whatever. And it wasn't until he finally went to rehab twice, but the second time he ended up with an older sponsor. And that was the guy, he's about your age, but my son was like 30. It was something about that guy that he had been through it, and he made him realize that he couldn't keep doing that.
So it's exactly what I was saying.
Yeah, but the hardest part about that is getting them to listen, getting them to someone like that. But he ended up being his sponsor from rehab, so I was so thankful.
That's a great example.
This guy was successful. He had lost everything.
Yeah.
And and now he was getting it back, and he was very passionate about, so that was just great for my son.
And I can definitely relate to that, in terms of finding the right person, a person you can talk to, a person who's going to be able to relate to you. It's hard for families, though, because you can't make your loved one do that. And to a certain degree, it's also, are you going to find the right person? Are they going to run into the right person? That kind of thing. But you got to get exposed to it. You got to get exposed to a different way of thinking and some different ideas. that phrase, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So if I'm just sitting on the couch doing my own thing, I'm never going to get better. That's where you might want to start thinking about how do you start to confront some of this stuff and start setting parameters and boundaries. Hey, you got to go to meetings or whatever it would be. Now, when you start to have the, hey, you got to go to meetings conversation, you also have to be willing to fill in the blank after that, which is, hey, you got to go to meetings or here's what's going to happen. A, B, C, and D. Yes?
My daughter, when she was really ready to to do a recovery, was advised to just go to as many meetings as you can
Yeah.
go to. And that's how you find somebody that you can identify with. And that's what she did. She just went to a lot of different meetings, and it was after her relapse.
So you got so the question, just to go back, the original question was, they're doing these substances, they're doing these things. Clearly, it's not going to work out. What can you do? And one of the ideas is, can you get the person to get around other recovering people? And you might have to have some very difficult conversations to get that done. For the most part, a lot of us don't want to do those things, guys. You know that, right? It's very, very, very uncomfortable to go to meetings. It's very uncomfortable. It's very hard to admit that you have this problem. It's harder to go to a group therapy session or to a group session and kind of come out with having this problem and identify with all these people who have this problem. And now, what's that say about me? That's a hard thing for people to do. So you may have to set boundaries and kind of make them do them. I didn't do it until I had to do it. I did not do it until I had to do it. And for me, the boundary was, now I told you about my story. The boundary was, you can't live here unless you're doing recovery. You can't live in this house unless you're doing recovery. That was after a journey, though. Again, put this in your own perspective, and you don't. If the person doesn't start to get help, you probably will get to a point where you're saying those type of things to yourself. Because the one thing about this issue is it gets progressively worse. So that's the other part of this. But let's talk about other options if they won't do meetings. Will they see a therapist? Can you get them to see a therapist about anything? This is a different type of strategy, but will they go talk to anybody about anything? Even if it's about other issues, because sometimes people who have substance use disorder are willing to talk about their depression and their anxiety, but they're not willing to talk about their using. If you get them with the right therapist who has a background in addiction services, they can get to that through that other issue. Don't do what people have done to me. I've had people come to me, and I'll be sitting talking to them. About halfway through, they'll sit up and they'll look at me and say, "What the hell are you?" And I'll be like, "What are you talking about? I'm a drug and alcohol counselor." And I'll be like, "They told me you were a financial counselor." I'll be like, so don't get like that creative. Don't get that creative. I mean, it's got to be in the ballpark. It's got to be in the ballpark. But if it's in the ballpark, then you can start to, and the person can start to get in there. Great questions, though. Remember, there's different phases, guys, that you all are dealing with, and depending on what you're dealing with, that's your mindset is going to be different. Your outlook on things. Some of you might be a little bit relaxed right now because your loved one is in active recovery, part of the recovery process. If they're in active addiction, you're probably not so relaxed. Active addiction is where the person's actively using. It's kind of unfolding in front of you. You kind of do life in that crisis mode. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? I'm going to talk about that a little bit more tonight. But I don't know if you can relate to that, where you're sort of just always waiting for the other shoe to drop. You kind of, what's going to happen next? And that's that active addiction phase of this process. Now, when they get into recovery, when your loved one gets into recovery, you're probably not relaxed immediately. Am I right?
Right.
And I'm going to talk about the time frame for this. I don't know how long it takes till you take a breath. Anybody got a theory on how long it takes till you take a breath? Mary Kay?
No.
So
Very individual.
very individualized. It depends a lot on who the person is and what they're doing and what they're up to in their recovery, that kind of thing. There's a lot of data that suggests is that the relapse rates don't really fall until 5 years. Now, so if we could talk about that for a minute. If you look at just straight relapse rates, They go down year over year over year, and then at year 5, they fall off the cliff. In other words, relapse rates drop below 10% after 5 years. So 5 years tends to be a marker for people. But 5 years is a long time to be holding your breath. Would you agree? Were you going to say something?
I have a question. How do you know if they're in the recovery process and not still, and having relapses and not addicted, not
So-
an active addiction?
So you have different ways. The question was, how do you know what it is? Is it recovery or is it relapse? Or is it active addiction? Because a lot of this stuff can mimic itself, right? So you would want to look at these criteria and these symptoms. It's not really like it's not full-blown relapse until this is back, until all this stuff is back. Okay? So, and then active addiction would be they just really haven't entered into the recovery process at all. That doesn't mean they're using every day. They just never. So recovery process would be maybe the person went to rehab and is now doing some meetings, or maybe they just started coming to favor and they're doing something about the issue. They may not be doing it perfectly, but they're doing something. Do you guys get that? When you think of like the recovery process, let's get real clear on that. That doesn't mean that they're perfect. That means that they're actually in a process of working on recovery. Active addiction, let's just call active addiction not recovery. You're not doing anything, you're actively using, you haven't even initiated the process. That kind of thing. And then, of course, lapse, when I say subclinical, what I mean is it hasn't gotten that bad yet. It's just maybe a person has used a couple times, that kind of thing. And they haven't. So if I went out tonight and I had a couple beers and went home, nothing happened, I went out again next weekend, I went out again a couple more times, I'm still in the lapse phase. Okay, but if you guys see me 6 months from now, and now my tolerance is there, and I'm going through withdrawal, and I'm having interpersonal problems, and I'm not showing up for work, do you see what's happened? I've now entered back into full-blown relapse. The idea would be that the sooner you intervene, the better. So if a person lapses, then it's much easier to deal with them than if they go back into full-blown. Because if they go back into the full-blown using, then their brain is back to this. Okay? And this is one of the hardest things about this issue, guys. People don't want to let anybody know when they screw up. People don't know. They don't want to let anyone know when they screw up because they know that there's probably some consequences coming with that. Because we've laid that out in the conversations. If you do this again, here's what's going to happen. So we get into this weird zone where, now you're hearing organizations like Favor Greenville say this is a disease. If the person messes up, the only thing that matters is to get them right back on track. But at the same time, I can't tell you to ignore your own boundaries. Also, a lot of times people have other consequences associated if they make a mistake. For example, what if they're on probation? What if their job the way we do things with this particular issue doesn't promote openness and honesty around whether or not a person's using. We don't want to disappoint our loved ones. We don't want to let you down. We don't want to. But this part of it, guys, is so much part of what I see y'all dealing with, and it's one of the things that I want to try to help you guys figure out. The journey is so long, and it's full of ups and downs, that somehow understanding how you're going to handle this and having a real clear viewpoint on what that's like, that's probably the most important thing that you can do as you go through this process. Have a real clear idea, because remember, what you're told is that treatment equals recovery. You're told that they go to rehab and then they come out the other side and they live happily ever after. Right? You guys like my little PowerPoint doogie dear? That's some good stuff right there. Really, treatment is part of recovery. It's an initiation. It's a small part. It's not. So what you got to get your mind wrapped around is we might be dealing with this for a while, and that's really, really hard. That is, and I want there to be better solutions. I want there to be quicker solutions. I really, really want to be able to wrap the bow up and have people not have to worry about this. But let's think about this. This is a chronic lifestyle disease, not unlike diabetes type 2. If we can agree with that. And with diabetes type 2, you have to monitor it on an ongoing basis. Forever. I went home to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I am for a living. I'm Mr. Recovery, right? I am Captain freaking Recovery. That's all I do. I'm a CEO of a recovery community organization, that kind of thing. And when I went home and I was around my extended family, okay, and it was good times and everybody's just having a wonderful time and nobody's suffering any consequences, the thought that it would be nice to have a drink popped in my mind. Okay? Now, 17 years into recovery, having a very, very practiced, program, a very active program, a current mentor in my life, a frequent attendee to all recovery meetings and other things. What was I able to do? I was able to think that through, and I was able to process it and say, is that really how this is going to work out? Do you really think how's that going to do for your career there, Rich? How's that going to do for your relationship? And then it was never a threat. You guys, I was able to manage. But what if I'm not doing that? What if I'm not a guy who is around recovery? What if I'm just a person out there doing their thing, and I'm 7 years into this thing? Or what if I'm 17 months into it? That's a better example. 17 months instead of 17 years. Can you see how easy it would be to fall right back into, I'm going to go ahead and have a beer? And then you guys are what? If that's your kid or your husband or your wife, what's happening to you when they're doing that? You're panicking. You're panicking. This. I shouldn't say that across the board, but I'd make a guess that a lot of you guys are going to get very, very concerned. Is that a pretty good guess? Okay, thank you. So when I say that, the most important part of this process is you got to step back and take a deep breath and really try to think it through and literally try to calm down. I am not trying to minimize the seriousness of your situation by any means. Please understand that. This is very serious stuff. What I'm telling you, this is a survival mechanism that you all need to use. You've got to calm down and try to think rationally through every situation and literally just be asking yourself, okay, just what's the next step from here? So I had yesterday on the car ride back, I had a long conversation with a really good friend of mine in Pittsburgh who's going through it right now with his son. Okay, I've known this dude so I've been here for 6 years, almost 7 years. That means I've known him for 10. He's been dealing with this for 10 years off and on at varying levels. You guys get this? Certain periods where it's going very well, 3 years, that kind of thing. Certain periods where not so much. Right now, kid is 32 or 33. Right now, it's a period of time when it's not going so well. Okay? And, there's no good answer when he calls me, right? So he calls, he says, it's one of two things, Rich. It's either business or it's personal, or it's either business or a personal crisis. That's what he says to me when I get on the phone. And I knew that it was a personal crisis because if it's business, he just immediately starts talking. Hey, when do you want to come do this? You should do this. So I knew what it was. I knew who it was. I knew which one of the kids it was. And as he was talking through it, he figured out a solution I helped him figure out a solution for the immediate problem. Okay, which is the kid is in danger. What do? We're going to 302 him, get him in a program in Pittsburgh. Some folks that I know. Okay, so, and then this is what happened. He immediately went to, what do I do next? What's going to happen after that? What are these charges going to mean? Do you follow me? All the other what ifs clicked in. Can anyone relate to that? Is that another dumb question? Do you guys understand what I mean by all the other what ifs? You got the thing in front of you that's happening right in front of you. The house is on fire right here. And then so you have to put the house out. You have to put the fire out, but then you immediately start thinking about, I have to file the insurance claim to get the homeowner's insurance to come out, and that's going to take them this long, and then we're going to have to rebuild a new foundation, and maybe we could go over there and build the house. You start thinking of all those other things. And so this skill of being able to take a deep breath and step back from the situation and say, what is the next thing I need to do? That's all you guys need to figure out in any one of the circumstances is just what's the very next thing I need to do. Sometimes it's going to be something very serious like what we had to do where we had to commit this kid. Other times it's going to be, I'm stepping back and I'm going tomorrow night to group and I'm going to ask a couple questions. And that's all you can do is literally focus on like that 6 inches right in front. Because if you go too far down the road, you're going to lose your mind. You're going to lose your I got to think of a better, more clinically sophisticated way to say that. You're going to suffer anxiety-ridden pathologies that may manifest themselves in some type of physiological symptoms. Or you're going to lose your mind. So stepping back, understanding that it's a process, that it's a journey. That's kind of like the way to think about this. It's a journey. This isn't about a destination. It really isn't. It really isn't. I mean, that cliche of, it's a day at a time, that kind of thing, and like that we never graduate from this recovery process. The story I just shared about my experience of being in Pittsburgh, I mean, I'm telling you, we never graduate. We never graduate. I'm convinced that if I go out and I start using substances tonight, guys, that my life is going to fall apart. My family is going to fall apart. My wife is going to be sitting there asking, what do I do? Okay, so it is a journey. There's no finish line. That doesn't exist. So if it's a journey, how do you approach that? That's what I'm trying to get in touch with. Mary Kay?
When you talk about it as a journey, it is a journey for the person who is, suffering, but for the family, for us as well, I think it's important because we've been coming to favor for a very long time, the family support groups, to get help for us as a family. And my son knows that, and so he also knows that no matter what his decisions are, he can, in the back of his mind, know, well, hey, my family are educated now. They know a whole lot more than they did 10 years ago, so they're not so liable. I'm not going to be able to do what I did 10 years ago to disrupt their
He knows something's different.
He knows that it's different.
So if you couldn't hear, the comment was, no matter what her son does, she's coming to Family Recovery Group, and that's influencing him. He understands that something's different about this process. And this has been studied and has been researched. That's why the ARISE intervention model, so I'm a certified ARISE interventionist. ARISE is one of 3 evidence-based approved intervention models. That's why the ARISE intervention model makes the family commit to their own recovery program before they will do the intervention. So you guys have seen the old school intervention, the A&E intervention, when you go in and they just kind of lay you out. That's called the Johnson model. The ARISE model, you cannot do the ARISE model unless the family commits to their own recovery program, because the theory is, family systems theory tells us that as one member of the family changes, the whole family changes. Because we don't know it, whether we're paying attention or not. It happens mostly subconscious. We all have our roles within the family. We all have our ways of handling things within any family, but certainly within an addicted family. If you look, it's even predictable to a certain point. Somebody's going to lose it, right? There's going to be this is out of control, you're going to have to leave. Then somebody's going to try to pacify and patch it up. If there's siblings involved, one of them is going to be a mascot and trying to make people laugh. The other one's going to be an overachieving superstar who never has a problem at anything. You got to have a really good, so that they're bringing pride to the family, because this black sheep over here, you follow me? All that stuff starts to work out, and you start to fall into your patterns. But as soon as one part of those patterns start to change, the whole rest of the pattern they recognize, oh, this doesn't compute. This doesn't compute. I've shared it here before that the pattern in my life was act up, fight, leave, come back, settle down. Act up, fight, leave, and wait. And where my wife changed it was she stopped fighting. How about that? Diabolical, ninja type stuff going on right there. Didn't confront, didn't kick out, stopped fighting. And I knew something was different. I knew it was changing the dynamic. So to your point, Mary Kay, if it's a journey, the one part of the journey that you can commit to is your own recovery program. Because you can't control whether they show up for their groups, to your question. You can't show, but we would encourage you to let them know that you're here. And we're coming back again next week. And I always encourage family members to say things like, we're trying to find out what to do. We don't really know what to do. We're hoping they tell us, but they're the experts. We're just going to keep going. So that every time you come, he's thinking, oh no, what's going on over there? What kind of secrets are they talking about over there? We want them to know that you're in recovery. Yes?
Is there any data on a person in recovery on how effective providing positive incentives are?
So there's a lot of data. The question was, is there any data around positive incentives in recovery? There's a lot of data around positive incentives, getting people to do recovery programs and then it working out. But they don't necessarily say that the positive reinforcement made the behavior change. What they say is the positive reinforcement got the person to come to a program. Do you follow me? And that the program probably affected the change. It was the positive reinforcement. So there are programs in a lot of urban areas that will do this. It's called contingency management. And what will happen is every time a person comes to the group, they'll get a ticket. And the more groups they attend, more tickets go in the fishbowl. And then at the end of the group session, you pull out a name and you literally win like a big screen TV or something like that. And that gets people, it all comes back to this thing of how do you get people to come. Now those programs get criticized by people because, they get criticized by ignorant, uneducated people. People who don't understand that that's a professional program, and the biggest problem in getting anybody help is you can't help somebody if you don't see somebody. So this was a program that they developed. I've never actually run a program like that. I worked in it. I read about them quite a bit. And so it would be, you can't incentivize somebody to quit. So I couldn't say to Cynthia, I'm going to give you $100 if you go without using. Go without using for a month. That's not been demonstrated as effective. But if I say to her, I'll give you $100 if you attend 30 AA meetings this month. You go to 30 meetings and at the end of the month you get $100. That's been shown to be effective. Do you get the difference? So you can't pay somebody to stay clean, but you can pay somebody, it seems that you can pay somebody or incentivize somebody to go to programs that will ultimately lead to them getting clean. Obviously with different levels of success. So what other questions about anything related to the brain or about early addiction? And I'm going to jump into some other stuff. Let's do that. All right. So these are just some themes that I've identified in talking to people. To a certain degree, you could say that this is parenting in general, in my opinion. Especially if you have 7 kids. Exhausting. So the themes that kind of go on. It's an exhausting process, but there's hope, right? There are these periods of hope. He went to rehab. He's going to meetings. He's got a sponsor. There are these periods of hope. And then one of the hardest things is how do you handle these ups and downs of it looks good and then what? Oh no. Does that happen? That's almost as bad as, or that's almost worse than it's always down here. How do you handle the ups and downs? That I'm so hopeful. He's in a program. He's doing well. And then, boom, the next day you get a phone call that he was using. That kind of thing. What suggestions do you have for handling that disproportionate, that crash you get between hope and disappointment? Now, these aren't trick questions. So the biggest thing is you can't get too high and you can't get too low. You've got to try to approach this. This goes back to the ability to take a deep breath and kind of calm down and approach it from a level-headed. Don't get expectations. Do you guys know what I mean by that? Do not get expectations. Do not leave a meeting and do not leave a rehab family program or a session with a therapist and saying to yourself, he's got it. We're good. We got this. Don't do that. Don't set yourself up for that type of thinking. Understand that it's a process. Don't get too high. Don't get too low. How about the don't get too low part? Let's talk about that for a minute. The don't get too low part is tied to what? I think I have a slide in here. Let's go to this. I'll go back. I did not draw this. This is a ridiculous looking thing. But so what this slide is meant to do, now this person's talking about not an issue with addiction, but you go from point A to point B, you go from point A to the worst case scenario. Okay? This is what I'm talking about going too low. And there's all kinds of other explanations in between. And we're going to take the example of a relapse, of a lapse. So what you got here is, in this example, this is a person who took a test and went from, I got a C on my exam, to the world is over because he's going to lose his scholarship. He jumped from point A to point C. Well, this happens with something like relapse all the time. They're doing okay for a while, they slip up, and it's not about the relapse. What's it about? It's about full-blown, they're back in jail, they're overdosing and dying. Now, I understand why you think that way. I get it, because there's a hard edge to this. And I don't judge anyone for thinking that way. But do you see how this can be debilitating? This can crush you. And so it would be this idea of trying to take a step back and say, it could wind up that way, but it also, maybe it won't. Here are some things that I'm going to try. Here are some things that we're going to try. Here's how we're going to approach this. Where you try not to go to that worst case scenario thinking. Do you guys get that? And again, does anybody have really good strategies for that? Because that's what I want to get you guys. I want to get and share information on how you don't go to that worst case scenario immediately, how you step back and you try to think things through. But Cynthia, let me finish this thought though real quick. But I also want you to understand that I get it. I get how difficult it is to not go to worst case scenario thinking, especially in today's world when we're dealing with what we're dealing with some of the strange substances that are out there and all that kind of stuff. It is up the ante. It's probably harder than ever to deal with this particular issue. It's probably harder than ever than it's ever been in the history of mankind to deal with addiction because the stakes are so high. You know, my mom, was it possible that I could have died in a drinking and driving accident when I went out and did my thing? Yes. Was it possible that I could have, had some? It was possible, but it wasn't probable. Do you get that? That my mom wasn't operating with this point of view. So you guys do have a higher level stakes kind of, and you're also got, and this is a good thing, but in a way it can be a tough thing. You also get more information about this issue than you ever have before. In the media, right? There's always something on TV about addiction. There's always something on, a special on, especially about the opioid epidemic. If you're dealing with opioids, it's definitely going to be in your face. Cynthia, what were you going to say?
Well, I was saying there's so many techniques, meditation, journaling, talking to friends that you trust. But we had sort of a slip here, and I immediately, because I've been studying the story of David, whose life was, wow, believe me, back then. But this one study I went to, it was phenomenal, Rich. It was tied exactly to what was happening, even though it was a different occasion and everything. I went right to sleep.
So if we look at that, you have a couple different things going on. First of all, I'm assuming, is this at a Bible study kind of thing, or like a?
Well, it was a personal study.
Personal study. So you're accessing like information and it's tapping into your faith.
Yes.
And in a real tangible way that you were able to say, look, like this is even my life today. This is how.
Exactly.
And so you have to look for things like that. You're going to have to look. Now, it sounds like you sort of were doing that anyway, but you're going to have to. We talk all the time about reading devotionals. We talk all the time about educating yourself on this, getting around people to where you're going to be able to get an alternative side of the story. You're going to have to look for the information that lifts you up in the middle of those crises. You have to look for, yes.
My daughter was 17 and a half when she left home. Beautiful little girl, petite, blonde, so ignorant of the world. My greatest fear was that she would end up somewhere, a sex slave, I'd
All
never
those
seen
things,
that.
yeah.
And there was nothing to comfort me.
Yeah.
Nothing. I couldn't reach her. I couldn't talk to
Yep.
her. For long periods of time, I had no idea where she was. And the only thing that has gotten me through it is faith.
Faith,
Knowing,
yeah.
Trusting her to the Lord
Yep.
And he's brought her through. I mean, she's doing very well right now
Yep.
at 33.
But you're right, you have to find what works for you.
So, but there is an aspect to this, and your story that you're talking about definitely taps into it. There is an aspect of this where you're suffering. The families are suffering. When you don't know where they are, when you don't know what they may be up to, when you've gone through this and maybe you've experienced an overdose and stuff like that, there is a part of this where the families you're suffering, and you were suffering when your daughter was on the street and you didn't know where she was. And so there's also this, how do you deal, like, let's take addiction out of the equation, just as an exercise. Let's pretend we're not talking about addiction. Let's pretend we're talking about dealing with somebody who has cancer. Or let's pretend we're talking about anything else that you can imagine where you're suffering. How do you get by and do life in the midst of suffering is what this can come down to sometimes. Does that make sense? How do you do life in the midst of suffering? First of all, what do I mean by do life? What do I mean by do life? Wake up, go to work,
Take care of your other children.
take care of your other children, sleep. Good Lord, sleep. You got to sleep. Taking care of your other kids is a big deal. How do you talk to them? How do you taking care of your job, taking care of each other, being in a relationship, that kind of thing. That's the do life part of it, right? So one of the recommendations or one of the ideas is to try to frame that up in your mind. Please understand where I'm coming from, guys, and don't write me off. I'm not crazy when I say this. You guys are my heroes. Frame this up in your mind as a heroic journey that you're walking. That you're saying, like, I'm just going to get real with everybody. This thing could take my child, but it's not going to take me. This thing could take my husband, but it's not going to take me. I'm not going to let this thing destroy me. Okay? I'm going to be sad. I'm going to be wringing my hands. I'm going to be gnashing my teeth. This is going to be horrible. But this is not going to take my dignity, and it's not going to keep me in the bed, and it's not going to keep me from going to work. And you make meaning out of it. That's one idea. Does that make sense? You take it from this, because addiction is going to win if it keeps us in that dark, dark place. Do you guys get that? Addiction's going to win if we stay quiet and we stay scared and we stay ashamed and we just, we suffer in silence. Addiction wins if that's what we do. Addiction loses if we come out and we say, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, man. I'm going to do my life. And here's the second part of this. And this doesn't have to be with people who are dealing with recovery. You don't have to do this in recovery. But the second part is try to help somebody else. Okay? Try to help somebody else in the midst of your suffering. And if that can be by being here and helping other people that are going through this. That can also be a freaking soup kitchen. It could be somebody at your church. And like literally tell yourself a story of, I'm going through so much right now. I understand what human suffering is like. I'm going to try to alleviate some of this for other people in other areas, whatever it is. Now, some people will tell you that and they'll say, go help somebody in addiction. I don't think it has to be that, guys. I don't think it has to be that at all. I think it could be at the children's hospital, giving out Christmas gifts to the kids. I think it could be at a homeless shelter. It could be whatever it is. If it is addiction and recovery, that's great. But that it doesn't have to be that. But it's this idea, and then tell yourself, and then start to redefine the story around it. That look what this addiction's doing. It's creating this power in me, where I'm going to actually give back, and I'm actually going to try to rise above this. It might sound corny and it might sound silly, guys, but I'm telling you, this stuff has been studied. Making meaning out of suffering has really been the only effective therapeutic technique ever to help people get through grief. Yes, and then I'll get you.
My daughter died February 18th of this year of an overdose. It was fentanyl. And my husband passed away from a 6.5-year battle of cancer in September. So I've been going through a really, really tough time. My faith has been what I've turned to. Also, I turned here, and the support I've gotten here and God are the reasons that I am here tonight. I also have very close friends. But it's like Rich said, I am not going to let this disease that my daughter had ruin my life. She was 29 years old, and there's got to be a way that I can help other people when I feel like I'm well enough to do that. And I just want you to know that I know this fear you have of the other shoe dropping. I have another daughter who is an addict. She's in recovery now. And I really do have that thing where I need to step back and breathe, because I know it can happen. You can get that phone call and they can be gone. But I don't want that to define who I am for the rest of my life. And my daughter was a good person, and she was a teacher, and she didn't want this. And I decided that there is a stigma attached to it, and I just was not going to let that be. I was going to be transparent, and I don't care if my friends knew or the group, that I socialized with or whatever, because this is so much more than being worried about your reputation or, if it is, you know what I'm saying. Y'all all get it, because you wouldn't be here if you didn't get it. But I'm just saying, I just thank God every day that He has placed me around the people that He has, and that I've gotten, Rich has reached out to me, because I am able to step back, and I am breathing a little bit, and truly, I have to say my faith. God is the reason why I can breathe, and my daughter has found a place. They helped her find a place. It's all just worked out, and I just have to come. I'm coming to the meeting here in Greenville. I'm going to the meeting in Spartanburg, where I live, and it's just, I wouldn't want anybody to have to go through this. But since this is where I am, I'm going to make it count for something. Her death is going to count for something.
Thank you,
I'm going to help somebody.
Thank you. That's very, very brave of you to say that. And so this is what I'm talking about, guys. This is like the real deal stuff. This is there's nothing theoretical going on here. This is what's happening in the world. And so if you think about, like, where can the meaning come from? First of all, Kathy, I don't think we know yet exactly what it's going to look like and who you're going to touch, but you're going to touch somebody. And what's going to happen is, guys, is there's a ripple effect when you stand up against this and you say, nope. There's a ripple effect where other people hear your story, other people hear about what you're going through. And this could be Kathy's situation, but it could also be anybody else's in here. By virtue of you guys being here and being able to be public about this and being able to be out, what you do is you start to create this other vibe in the opposite direction of how addiction wants to roll. Again, remember, addiction thrives in the darkness and in the secrets and in the lies and in all the, we don't talk about it. Shh, be quiet. Shh, be anonymous. All that kind of stuff. Keep it quiet. Keep it quiet. You guys are blowing that out of the water. How many people are going to hear about this because of you being here? Who's going to wind up being helped for it? That's the mystery of this. if you've ever seen like memorials, if you've ever seen like classic situation where there's a memorial for somebody, that or somebody starts a program to help people that have passed away from a disease, that's also like another example of making meaning. What you're doing is you're transcending the event, and you're trying to say that we're going to wring something out of this. There's nothing good about this. I'm heartbroken forever, but we're going to wring something out of this. And so I would encourage you to start thinking of it that way, to start thinking about, and what does that look like for you personally, and what do you need to do to kind of put that into your life? What does that look like? Mary Kay, you ever hand up?
I've said it before, but for me, I had to find a way to figure out what good came out of all of this. Instead of saying, why me, why my family, why my child, I had to figure out what good has come out of this. And I know I've said before that if Dylan didn't suffer and go through what he's been through, I wouldn't be the same person that I am.
That's right.
Because he's taught me to not be judgmental. He's taught me, patience. He's taught me just a lot of things.
Yeah.
Through what we've been through. And so I wouldn't be the same.
No, and the other thing is that you guys got to remember, you guys are the only people I really like. You and people in addiction and stuff like that. Like when I'm around people who aren't in touch with this type of stuff, I'm telling you, I don't know when it changed, but I struggle with superficial BS conversations, superficial you know what I'm talking about. That it's a problem because it's hard for me to do things that I'm supposed to be doing. Y'all ever have? So have you ever? So I don't know if you guys have. I have young kids, right? And so now having kids involves you got to actually have business relationships because you got to set up play dates. You guys know what I'm talking about? I don't know what in the hell ever happened to just go play. Now it's got to be I got to hang out with this dad who I hate because these kids, my kids like their kids, right? And he wants to talk about. I mean, I'm just being straight. He wants to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers and stuff like that. And I'm sorry, I don't. There's stuff going on, and I don't. I'm not saying I want to be heavy all the time, but I enjoy talking to people who are. I enjoy deeper conversations. This is just where I'm at. And you guys are real. Y'all are real. And one of the reasons why you're real is because you're here. As soon as you come in that door, as soon as you make a decision to walk in the doors of Favor, or any other group, if it was an Al-Anon meeting or something like that, as soon as a family makes a decision to walk in those doors, you have now just made a decision to stare this thing in the eye. To no longer, look away, cross your fingers, and hope for the best. No matter what stage you're in this process. And that is incredibly brave, and that's admirable in my opinion. No matter what the circumstances are, if you're coming in and doing that, that's where it's at, man. And then you start to learn also what you can affect, what you can't affect, how you can help, and what you can do and what you can't do. Can you do an intervention? Can you not do an intervention? Can you make the person go to meetings? Can you not make the person go to meetings? But that's the journey that y'all are on. That is just as important as the journey that they're on. I wanted to talk a little bit more because people, this is also common stuff as you get into suffering. Sometimes you start to question your faith, right? You start to, why me, God? That kind of thing. And and again, this is whatever manifestation of this or whatever you're into, and even if you're not into this, but this idea, if you are a person of faith, this is a time to lean on it, okay? If you believe in the power of prayer, this is definitely a time to break off the power of prayer. Would you guys agree with that? Yeah. So trying to figure this part of it out. If you struggle at all with that part of it, have I been abandoned? What's going on? What do we do? I would suggest you talk to somebody in your church. You get with somebody. You can get support through other people too. You can get pastoral counseling. Because there are some deep questions to answer here. And again, you can do this no matter what you believe. But if you have a faith background, I'm going to tell you, pull it out of your pocket and use it. Mm-hmm. And because there's a lot of this that's out of your control. And one of the things about the power of prayer, that's a very useful tool if you're dealing with something that you don't actually have control of. What's a useful tool in all kinds of different ways? But do you guys get where I'm coming from? You're in the middle of a storm that you actually don't control the outcome of. And so the power of prayer. And try to work through that as well, if that's something that you're struggling with. And also, when it comes to getting help for these issues, and when it comes to getting support, remember, you can cast a wide net. So we recommend you come to something like this where you're going to get specific information about addiction and recovery. But let's say you did this every other week and you did the lecture part of this, but maybe you didn't really... There are also other groups that you can go to, so a Bible study or a prayer group at church or some other type of program. I guess what I'm telling you is cast a wide net on where you get your support. And don't feel like it has to be one type of place. But remember, there's got to be one quality of the people supporting you. They cannot be judgmental, and they have to understand that addiction is a disease, it's not a sin. And so you don't want to be, but otherwise, I would say cast a wide net. If you feel comfortable getting support from other places, run with that. Human beings, we need each other. Okay? I can't believe I just said I didn't like that kid's dad. And I'm on Facebook. I don't know what to say now. Let's just hope for the best. Oh my goodness. All right, well, I tell you what, I think on that note we might need to wrap it up.
Rich, we don't all like everyone.
I understand that. I get it, yeah. Usually I can get away with that. I'm just saying it to you guys. So, all right. Thank you for being here tonight. Next week, if you haven't been, it'll be a little bit of a different group. We'll sort of circle up the chairs and we'll kind of talk open discussion, that kind of thing. Carol, I appreciate you doing it last week for me. And then the following week we'll come back and we'll do this again. I had somebody today text me some suggestions for some topics. Okay, that's how I came up with some of the stuff I wanted to talk about tonight. And if you notice, we went a little bit of a different direction, okay? If you have ideas for topics, text me or email me. Or tell your coach or tell whomever. Let me know what it is you're interested in talking about as we go through these lecture series. So if you have an idea, throw it out there. And we'll see if we want to do this. Any other announcements or anything else that I'm missing?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So my son, a week ago, I thought he was going to be a poster boy.
Yeah.
For success, and we're only 110 or so days into this. But after 30 days in in-house rehab and coming out and coming here regularly, 4, 5, 6 times a week, it dwindled off.
Yeah.
Not coming at all, even though he has a coach. So I'm still at that point of trying to get him to come back. Keep encouraging him, to come back to favor, reach out to your coach. If we can't convince him, or if he's not doing that, I believe I know his coach's name. Can I ask his coach to call him?
That'll happen anyway.
Okay.
That'll happen anyway. Okay. What we would encourage with the coach, we wouldn't encourage you to contact the coach, because what's going to happen there is that's going to work on their relationship.
Okay.
Now, what you could do is if you needed support and you wanted to talk it through, you could call the hotline and talk to them about it and then you could tell them who the coach is and stuff. What you want to do is you want to avoid kind of putting yourself in the middle of that relationship in any kind of way, because ultimately you want him to be able to come back. And people they'll really read into things. And you and I know that you're not doing anything wrong, but it'll be like, what are you doing? That's like and this is true, guys, to a certain degree, the coach and the individual at the individual level, that's sort of like a sacred relationship to a certain degree.
I understood that privacy level, that's why I hadn't reached out.
And so, but what you could do, first of all, rest assured that there will be phone calls anyway.
Okay.
The second thing, though, is you can always call that hotline, because that's not a one-on-one relationship that they have with the person. And then you talk it through with them, you're good to go. And then they can work it through with the coach. Does that make sense? That's a better way to do it. Then you're not in the middle of anything. In the meantime, though, keep encouraging him, and even ask, like, Because one of the most curious questions I have when I hear somebody quit coming is, why did they quit coming? You know, is it just like going to the gym, like New Year's Day, you go to the gym, you go to the gym, you go to the gym, and then all of a sudden you stop going? Or did something happen? So maybe ask that.
He got his dream job.
Oh,
Passed his drug
that's
test.
one of the problems, guys, is sometimes recovery gives you back your life, and then your life takes you away from recovery. So, well, he will be getting a call. All right, guys, let's close this thing up. Let's take a second. A moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease. And then a serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, good deal.